Hi there, my name's Kat and I'm an education manager for the Outdoor and Woodland Learning project of the Coigach and Asset Living Landscape Partnership. Today we're going to be taking a close look at woodland. We'll look at the individual tree species, the habitat they create and the other wildlife that benefits from this habitat. Now across the UK there's different types of woodland with different mixes of tree species. Up here in the Northwest Highlands, where pockets of woodland still manage to hold on despite the pressures they face, the predominant species is birch, and then that's dotted with other different tree species. So we'll start by taking a closer look at the birch tree. This is a birch tree, and one of the most distinctive characteristics is this very light bark. Now, birch is what's known as a pioneer species, which means it's one of the first trees to grow in an open area that can be quite exposed and challenging in terms of conditions. So this bark and the colour of it is thought to reflect light, which protects the vulnerable tissues underneath the surface of the bark. And birch grow relatively quickly. They can reach 6 metres in about 12 years, and this means they create a woodland environment quite quickly which stabilises the temperature and provides shelter, and other trees that are a bit more vulnerable to exposed conditions can then move in and start growing. Also, on average, the birch doesn't live quite so long, so it can live between 60 to 90 years generally. So if we take a closer look at the birch leaf, we can see that it's heart-shaped. It's got a toothed, also known as serrated, edge to it, and it's quite shiny. So this is a rowan, and when it's not covered in mosses and lichens, its bark is smooth, light grey in colour. It's another pioneer species that moves into an open area relatively quickly and grows pretty quickly. It can reach 6 metres in about 20 years, and it lives on average for about 200 years. And this species is actually a member of the rose family. So if we take a look at the rowan's leaf, what looks like many different leaves is actually one leaf. So this is known as a compound leaf, and it's comprised of little leaflets, so they're in pairs with a single terminal leaf. And again, we can see that these leaflets have a toothed or serrated edge to them. So this is a hazel. It's actually a member of the birch family, and it has this smooth grey-brown bark. You can see it's got multiple stems, and this is a tendency of this species to throw up lots of different shoots, and it can be actively encouraged through a process called coppicing, whereby the main stems are removed and then new stems grow. And through this kind of process, the tree can live for several hundred years. So if we take a close look at the hazel, we notice that the new stem growth is covered in little hairs, which makes it feel quite rough. The leaf is kind of circular in shape with this distinctive little point to the end of it. The edge is also toothed, and it's what we call double serrated because it's got the main teeth dotted along, and then in between these are smaller teeth. The top and the bottom of the leaf are covered in fine hairs, and so they feel quite rough in texture. This is an oak tree. It has grey-brown fissured bark on its trunk and branches. This is an extremely slow-growing, long-lived tree. It can live for 500 to 1,000 years. And they have quite distinctive leaves, which are lobed. And these are so tasty to invertebrates and get really nibbled to the point that in August the tree will produce a second flush of leaf growth to compensate for the loss. So this is an aspen tree, and it's got quite distinctive diamond-shaped markings to the bark of its trunk. UK-wide, this tree is quite rare, but so you tend to find it around and about the Northwest Highlands of Scotland. And if we look up close at its leaves, we can see they're quite round, and they're toothed, but the teeth are fairly blunt. The leaves are shiny and they start off as this sort of red colour, and as spring progresses they turn green. And they're also attached to the stem in a way that they flutter in the wind. So that provided a brief overview of some of the key species found in the Northwest Highlands. Now, trees have adapted a variety of strategies and methods for pollinating and seed dispersal. So let's go explore some of those. So trees employ two main strategies for pollination. One of them is utilising the wind, and the other is enlisting the help of insects. So if we look at the oak, you may try and think of flowers on an oak tree and be a bit stumped. I certainly was for a while. And if we look here, we can see that these little dangly things here are the male flowers of the oak tree. So they're very, very small and not very obvious. And if we look on the tip, to the tip of the stem, you might be able to see these little structures here, and they're the female flowers. So basically what happens is the male flowers produce their pollen and release them into the wind, and then this lands hopefully on a female flower and fertilises the flower. Hazel do a similar thing. So we've got the male catkins here, and not quite in flower yet, but we can see the bud of a flower starting there for the female. So that's the female flower and the male flower. And again, they release pollen into the wind, which lands on the female flower and fertilises the flower. And birch trees are pretty much the same. They have the male flower and the female flower on the tree. Now, aspen is an interesting one, because aspen have both female and male trees. So one tree will only produce male flowers, another tree will only produce female flowers. Interestingly enough, in Scotland, they very, very, very rarely do this. And they've got another strategy for reproduction, which is by suckering. And this is where babies pop up out of the ground along the root line. And they are essentially clones of the parent tree. And because of this, because they're clones, they're an exact replica of that parent, they remain connected to the root system. And so they're essentially the same tree, and as a result, they can be 10,000 or more years old. So they're thought to be one of the oldest, longest living organisms on the planet. And finally, we have the rowan. So the rowan has a totally different strategy. It employs insect help. So it has these beautiful bunches of flowers that attract bees, they attract flies, they attract beetles. They lure these insects in with the reward of nectar, and while those insects are burrowing in, searching for their sweet reward, they get covered in the pollen. And then the insect flies off to the next flower, the pollen falls onto the female parts of the flower, and hopefully fertilisation occurs. So with insect pollinated flowers, the tree puts more effort into creating a beautiful flower that's going to lure the insect in. With wind pollinated, the tree doesn't need to bother putting energy into creating a pretty flower, because it doesn't need to advertise anything. It's simply releasing its pollen out into the wind. In terms of seed dispersal, again, different strategies are utilised by the trees. So the oaks and hazels have a similar strategy. So we've got an acorn here. It's a bit shriveled because it's from last year, but very obvious. It has its little cup and the little nut sits in there. And then we have some hazelnuts. So the hazel tree produces the hazelnuts, the oak tree produces the acorn, and these are collected by various animals, birds, mammals, buried away in little caches for their winter feeding, and hopefully some of them are forgotten about, which will then germinate and sprout into little saplings. The birch tree, the female flower turns into a long catkin, which has little winged seeds that we can see here. and so that's wind dispersed. So they've got little wings on them and they fly off into the air as far and wide as the wind will carry them. And then finally the rowan tree, so that produces the bunched red berries that we associate with autumn, those bright red berries. And again, this is a strategy to lure in an animal. In this case it's primarily birds, and the birds get that yummy treat of the flesh of the fruit. The seed passes through the bird, and in the bird dropping, the little seed gets a nice little package of fertiliser wherever it falls. So these individual trees create the main structure of the woodland environment, and this habitat has many different levels. So starting at the very bottom, beneath the soil, where the root systems are, which anchor in the trees and support them and keep them held there so they don't fall over. And as a result of these roots branching out and digging deep, the soil around is stabilised. So this is great for burrowing animals, and it's also great for things like flood defence. Also under the soil is a lot of fungal activity. So there's these vast networks of fungi, and they connect up with the root systems of the trees. And there's a kind of symbiotic relationship going on there, so they both benefit from each other. The trees pass on sugars to the fungi, and in return the fungi pass on nutrients that they can break down and access in the soil to the trees. And amazingly, these networks mean that across the whole of the woodland environment, the trees are all connected up and they can communicate with each other, which is just fascinating. So the next level is the woodland floor, and down here it's a really stable environment. It's very sheltered, there's a little microclimate going on as moisture's held, and that really supports the life, the ground flora that live here. Like we can see this little bluebell that's just coming into bloom. There's a lot of leaf litter present, and there's a lot of deadwood, fallen deadwood from the trees themselves. So that's the whole cycle of the nutrients being returned to the ground and creating food for this abundance of life that's down here. Coming up further now to where the trunks of the trees are, so we'll have standing deadwood here, and that will create a food source for burrowing insects. It will create nooks and crevices for nesting birds, for mammals to hide in. We can see here that there's a lot of moss and lichen on the tree trunks, which creates further habitat for small creepy crawlies. So there's so much life going on at this height as well. And there will be other sort of shrubby plants present as well, so things like brambles that create little tussocks for nesting birds and insects to hide amongst. And then we've got the tree canopy, which is full of tasty leaves, especially with birch trees and oak trees, which support hundreds of individual species of invertebrates. So this is really rich, tasty pickings for birds. So essentially what these layers mean is that there's a whole variety of food and shelter for an abundance of life that the woodland habitat supports. Now, it's all very busy, but as a human walking through this environment, it's not always obvious because things like to hide away when they hear us coming for safety. But one of the biggest indicators right now of that busyness is the birds singing as they search out food and guard their territories to raise their young in. So it's beautiful, it's beautiful music around me right now, but the best time to hear the birds singing is in the dawn chorus early in the morning. So if we rewind back to 4 AM this morning, let's go and hear it. So it's still quite dark out here, but as we can hear, the woodland is alive with song around me. And the number of individual songs give an idea of the number of individual birds residing in this woodland neighbourhood. So if we just have a listen in to see who we can hear. So we've got a blackbird over this way. He's got a sort of slow, lyrical, very melodic song. Oh, and this peeping behind me, the teacher, 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 teacher. That's a great tit. Cuckoo's just come into the mix. I don't know if the camera's picking up that. we've got a kind of go, 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 go team, a very cheery upbeat song, and that's the chaffinch. And equally there's a sort of go, 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 go team, and so sort of like sounds like a sad, oh my team's losing, disheartened song, which is the willow warbler. And we've got song thrush over that way, and they have sort of short bursts of phrase that are usually repeated 2 to 3 times each. Oh, another blackbird started singing just behind me. So woodlands are incredibly special habitats. And on top of this, scientific research is revealing how they contribute to improved immune function in our bodies, how they reduce our stress levels. So not only are they sustaining vast amounts of life, but they're also contributing to our health and well-being as we spend time amongst trees in woodlands. We hope you've enjoyed taking a closer look at woodland habitat. If you'd like to find out more about the Coigach and Assynt Living Landscape Partnership, check out our website at www.coigach-assynt.org. Or you can find out more about the Scottish Wildlife Trust at www.scottishwildlifetrust.org.uk.